March 20th, 2003, thousands of troops of the US-led coalition began to pour across Kuwait's border with Iraq and head towards Baghdad. Within 20 days, they had arrived in the capital and broken Saddam Hussein's regime. The world saw the progress of Operation Iraqi Freedom as a triumph of technological might that soon overwhelmed the Iraqi forces. But there is another story of hard-fought, nasty street battles that wrought death and destruction on both sides. 152 coalition troops died during the push for Baghdad. The number of Iraqi dead is unknown, but estimates run in the thousands.
It was inch by inch, foot by foot, just like it has always been. World War II, World War I.
I thought it was gonna be all like brave, like Marines or whatever. I was scared to death.
They were putting bayonets in folks.
What I seen, people's legs in other people's laps.
It changed us all forever.
Using new footage and specially created combat graphics, this program tells of key battles that shaped the war.
Someone's going to have to argue with me pretty hard that anybody since Vietnam fighting the North Vietnamese has confronted an enemy that was this determined.
This is the story of the war's crucial turning points.
They went crazy pulling the statue down.
Beating it with the soles of their shoes, which is one of the biggest disgraces, I guess, that they can bestow upon a person.
A war fought with a ferocity, which helps explain why this is a battle that isn't over. This is the home from home of the U.S. Army's 270 Armor Battalion, a former Iraqi military compound in Abu Ghraib in western Baghdad. 270 are part of 150,000 coalition forces trying to keep the peace in Iraq.
Now we're leaving the 270 compound. We're gonna go out on our patrol, out into the wilderness, Indian country. It means that there's bad guys out there. They just keep us guessing. We could be driving down the road right now and we could be engaged by AK fire. It's just anybody's guess.
More U.S. troops have been killed in peacekeeping operations than during the combat phase of the war, many of them victims of roadside bombs.
There have been several along this road. They can be disguised as a trash bag, a Coke can. They've put some explosives in dead animal carcass because they know that we might just drive over them.
The high-risk area is the market in Abu Ghraib.
The market's pretty bad. Apparently it's one of the worst in Baghdad. We used to get a lot of thumbs up signs from people when we drove through the market. Now we don't.
Staff Sergeant Christopher Kahunsky and the rest of 270 were part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. They crossed the Kuwaiti border on March 20th, 2003, fought their way to Baghdad, and a year later, were still there.
It's a surprise because, we initially thought that if we fought the war, that we would go home with the mission accomplished. That we would go home, the heroes, and we got the job done. President Bush landed on the aircraft carrier and said, Major ground combat's over. Everybody cheered, and there were welcome home banners and job well done banners. And we're still here, and we're still losing soldiers.
This is how the world saw the start of the war. Before dawn on March 20th, precision bombs began to strike regime targets in Baghdad in a campaign designed to shock and awe. For the combat troops in Kuwait, 300 miles away, it was different. Cannoneers of 111 Marines were given the order to launch the first artillery barrage into Iraq and start the ground war.
It was exhilarating. A lot of booms, flashes of light. It was all dark, so you couldn't really see anything.
Your hands start shaking, but your mind keeps working.
It was a huge adrenaline rush, but at the same time, it was almost like it was unreal, like it wasn't happening.
United States Marines were the first to cross the border. One of their objectives was to seize oil fields in the south. They were crammed into amphibious assault vehicles known as AAVs, or tracks.
It was like riding in a sardine can. They packed us Marines in here really tight with all our gear, our ammunition. It was unbearable, but we had to suck it up. We're Marines.
All you see is tracer rounds from Patriots and everything going overhead, and you know, the whole sky's lit up like 4th of July.
The sun was just coming up, and just hearing those thunderous explosions, that's when I realized, wow, I'm going to war.
The Army followed out into the desert. 19,000 troops and some 10,000 vehicles, including the world's fastest and most powerful battle tank, the M1A1 Abrams.
I think the first road trip we actually took was 26 hours. And we rotated through, actually sleeping and commanding the tank, because it's an awful long time to drive straight through. I think the Army purposely engineers Army vehicles to be uncomfortable, because whenever you try to sleep in them, there's always a jagged edge or a pointy object in some place where your head would fit just perfectly. A lot of vibrations, a lot of getting bumped around, trying to get comfortable in a very uncomfortable environment.
The war had one aim: to take Baghdad without delay. The Army would take the desert route from Kuwait, attacking Baghdad from the southwest. Leading the way was the 3rd Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Buford Blunt.
We had identified Baghdad as the center of gravity. We knew we needed to get to Baghdad and take the regime out. And so we really didn't want to get bogged down in all the cities going up to Baghdad. That's one reason I tried to stay out to the west in the desert. There really were no large, major military forces in the cities. They were outside the cities.
The Marines would take the roads and attack Baghdad from the southeast.
And so we were there to create that dilemma for the enemy, that he was being attacked on 2 frontages and he would have to deal with significant combat power, both coming from the southeast and coming from the south.
The coalition enjoyed overwhelming air superiority, but to win the war, their troops would need to seize ground from 200,000 Iraqi fighters, who outnumbered them by 2 to 1.
Once we went across that berm with Alpha Troop and started hearing them 50 cals go off and the tanks going off and the Bradleys going off, reality set in. Buddy, we are at war, whether you realize it or not. So you got to do whatever you got to do to get home.
During the first 2 days of the war, the British with U.S. Marines took the port of Qusar and headed north to surround Iraq's second city, Basra. U.S. Marines then bypassed Basra and approached the city of Nasiriyah. To open a southeastern route to Baghdad, they had to capture intact 2 important bridges in the city: the southern Euphrates Bridge and the northern bridge over the Saddam Canal. But on the outskirts of Nasiriyah, they discovered an army convoy which had been ambushed by enemy forces. The vehicles were in flames. Several soldiers were missing. One of them, a young private called Jessica Lynch.
At that point, I turned to the regimental commander and the battalion commander, and I said, we have to accelerate the attack. We have to find those missing soldiers, and we need to get those bridges before they're blown.
Natonski brought forward the attack on the bridges by 24 hours. Bravo Company 1-2 Marines would take the northern bridge by going round to the east to avoid an urban battle. Alpha Company would take the Euphrates Bridge, and Charlie Company would follow Bravo to the northern Canal Bridge. Intelligence foresaw no difficulty with the terrain or the Iraqis. They expected mass surrenders from the Republican Guard and inept fighting from Fedayeen troops and Ba'ath Party militias. But it would not go as planned.
The initial intelligence analysis basically said that there might be some minor resistance, but then we expected the enemy to pull out and leave the city. With respect to the terrain, we had photos, we had maps of the city. We pretty much knew what the terrain was like and what the construction of the buildings were. However, we had not factored in the fact that it had rained several days earlier.
We can now build up a picture of what happened on the Nasiriyah battlefield that day.
I remember as we were approaching the city of Al-Nasiriyah, there was a sign in English that said, "Welcome." When I saw a sign that says, "Welcome" in English, I became very suspicious.
On the morning of the 23rd of March, according to plan, Bravo took the lead, crossing the Euphrates Bridge. As soon as Bravo moved round to the east, they started to receive fire. Their heavy vehicles ran into soft, muddy ground and began to get stuck fast.
You're gonna hear the cry from the crew members. "We can't move, we're stuck, we can't move, we can't move."
And, next thing you know, they're up, the mud's up above their, almost, at their turn.
To see one of our vehicles being immobile because of the soil sent an impulse of panic throughout the entire company.
To use an oft-used term, Murphy's Law was playing hell with us at this point. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong.
Rushed into the attack and stuck fast, the Marines now discovered that their radios would not work. They had no communications.
We had some difficulty with comm for a couple of reasons. I think for the battalion, it was really our first experience with combat, and there were a lot of people trying to talk over each other on the radio, which didn't help.
Did we get a comm check?
Alpha Company, meanwhile, followed Bravo in their AAVs. But just as they got to the Euphrates Bridge, they too were caught in a firefight.
And the next thing you know, we hear rounds just whiz past our heads coming from behind us. We could see rounds impacting on the berm like just a couple feet away from us. I mean, might sound kind of weird or sadistic, but we actually thought it was kind of funny. We just dropped down and started rolling down and just laughing about it.
It was like a game. It looked like a game, but we were in it. And it went, for us, so fast that when we looked at each other and we realized that we were moving, we've been fighting for hours.
I compare it to a dimmer switch, and the longer we were there, the dimmer switch kept getting turned up. I was very concerned that it was only a matter of time till we started taking some casualties.
Charlie Company, whose tanks were refueling after rescuing some soldiers from the Army convoy of Jessica Lynch, crossed the Euphrates. But instead of following Bravo, they went straight up what became known as Ambush Alley.
Bravo Company, unbeknownst to me at that point, was bogged down in mud and everything else that was inside the city. And basically, we were supposed to go around to the eastern side of the city to secure the northern bridge, but we ended up going straight up what they're calling Ambush Alley.
In their lightly armored tracks, Charlie ran the gauntlet of automatic fire and RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, fired by hundreds of Iraqis seeking another victory, like the one they had scored against the Army convoy that morning.
We took heavy fire the whole way. It seemed like the further we got north, the more the fire picked up. Small arms, some machine guns, some RPG fire. Vehicles in front of the column were reporting people running across the roads, firing at the column.
I couldn't even relay to my lieutenant what was going on fast enough. It was just everything was evolving so fast. I saw numerous RPG shots at my vehicle and the vehicle behind me. I'm guessing 6 or 7 hits we took. Towards the end of Ambush Alley, we actually ran over somebody. And, like, he got caught in our tracks. It was kind of surreal. Like, to see people actually like falling.
One of the last tracks was torn open by a rocket-propelled grenade.
Inside the track was chaos. I heard, people donning gas masks. The whole track was filled with black smoke. We didn't know where it was coming from. People screaming. I was trying to get out to get some air because I was choking on the smoke.
People ran to the vehicle and unlocked the back doors, and people poured out. There was some significant casualties from the back, some severe leg wounds.
The initial hit from the RPG left me blind for about, I think it was an hour and a half. I couldn't see nothing. Just everything was hazy, real foggy. And what I seen, it was just, people's legs and other people's laps.
Under increasingly intense fire, Charlie made it to the northern bridge and began to defend it. The drama that unfolded was captured by a photographer embedded with Charlie Company.
Knew we needed to do something, be it move or spread out or tack to the north. Try to do something to get out of the way of this, what had turned into a kill sack for the enemy's artillery.
Probably within a half an hour, we had our mortars were up firing, and one of our mortar tubes was hit directly by either an RPG or a artillery round. And we had the first Marines that were killed.
I remember Lieutenant Reed, which was one of the lieutenants that rode on my track. I remember him, just coming to the back of my vehicle, just bleeding from like every orifice of his face. I was like, oh God, and he was like the first person that I saw that was just like tore up.
When you start hearing all these guys screaming and moaning and yelling out, and that's when, and I remember looking back and I saw Doc Robinson, running around doing his thing, and I was just lining these guys up.
It made my heart jump into my throat, seeing them down there and seeing them hurt, but I gotta push that aside, do your job. I mean, there'll be time to grieve later on, feel sorry for them later on, but now it's time to act, not time to cry.
They were in bad shape. A couple of amputees, literally guys holding other guys' legs. You're taught that there's a golden hour that you can get those guys out of there. And with some of these guys, we were past that hour.
While most of Charlie stayed to secure the northern bridge, a convoy of 5 tracks sped back down Ambush Alley to evacuate the casualties. Minutes after setting off, one of the tracks was hit.
As we were going over the bridge, it was just a huge explosion. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what it was. All I know is it just rocked the whole vehicle. After that, it was all black for like about 2 minutes. I remember yelling back and telling guys to get out. At this time, I didn't know that I had lost everybody in the back.
It was just a big fireball. It was maybe 25 meters in front of us. It was body parts came out of the vehicle. It was like there was nothing left. There's no way anybody could have lived off of it.
Moments later, Sergeant Schaefer's track packed with Marines was also hit.
I felt heat coming up through the turret, and then we lost our steering. We crashed into the building. I did look over, and there was hundreds of Iraqis just running at us. And that's when I was like, everybody just get out.
As soon as the track stopped, it just all the small arms fired, concentrated on that. You could tell, I could hear the rest of the tracks going off in the distance. So I knew we were alone. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't even actually know where we were. We were kind of disorientated.
Marines escaping the burning vehicles found themselves caught in the firestorm of Ambush Alley with no cover.
Saw a little alleyway with a pretty high wall behind it, and when everybody just started piling up behind that wall. We sat there for a while and we were like, we got to get into a place with better cover. That's pretty much when we decided just
we got to get into these houses next to us. Doesn't matter how, just get us in there.
We just got the casualties into the house. And we figured we just hold up there until we get some help.
One of the convoy tracks, damaged in Ambush Alley, sped back to Alpha's position on the Euphrates Bridge.
And that's when a rocket-propelled grenade hit it again, and we knew automatically that there were going to be mass casualties because the way it actually jumped off the ground when it was hit and just dropped and it stopped moving.
When the ramp rolled down, just a leg rolled off of it, and that the inside was pretty much just a mesh of parts and whole people.
If the wounded were to survive, they needed to be evacuated by helicopter.
I looked at the road. There's power lines on either side of it. It's pretty tight. So directly across from the road, there was an alleyway. Now, it's still pretty narrow, but definitely enough room for the 46. So we just came in and set it down right there.
I just got goosebumps watching it. And then I got a sick feeling in my stomach, thinking that it was only a matter of seconds till they destroyed that helicopter.
The fighting had been going on for nearly 3 hours. It was most intense at Charlie's position, still isolated and trying to hold on to the northern bridge. Bravo was still stuck in the mud on the eastern side of Ambush Alley. And Alpha was under intense fire at the Euphrates Bridge.
As the day went on and the fighting up on the northern bridge started to intensify,
it's off! That was off!
There we came into a little bit of fog of war. We knew there was a big fight on, but it was very difficult to get true clarity on exactly the number of our casualties.
At the north end of Ambush Alley, Marines from Charlie were still holed up in the house, surrounded by Iraqi fighters.
We thought we were from the beginning because, like, our lieutenant wasn't there, staff sergeant wasn't there.
It's pretty much a squad mentality, pretty much. It was just like, pretty much, we have to take care of our own.
I was scared to death. Like, in the beginning, it was like, we're all confident, yeah, these guys, we're winning. As soon as you start seeing the first guys, like, get hit, it's sinking feeling, like, we might not make it. It was more scary. I wanted to go home, like, I ain't gonna lie.
I don't care. You can put the bravest guy in that situation. I think he'll break down and he'll be scared also. We experienced it, and it changed us all forever.
With no radio communications or orders from higher up, Alpha at the Euphrates Bridge decided to act.
I began to realize that the longer we sat there, probably the more dire the situation would be. Dan Whitnam is company commander for Charlie Company, and I thought Dan's in trouble, and he needs help. I realized that the time was coming to make a decision, because I was not going to stand by idly and allow Charlie Company to get chopped up or take further casualties when I could be in a position to assist them.
Captain Brooks ordered Alpha Company to roll down Ambush Alley to help Charlie at the northern bridge. Marines from Charlie Company, still trapped inside the house, heard the approaching convoy.
Once we see them, we're waving at them. They open up fire on us because they saw we had weapons. You know, we were waving our weapons, which is probably a stupid mistake.
Luckily, they didn't hit nobody. It was pretty, like, we got some communication by waving at them or whatever.
Loading up the Marines from the house, the convoy, led by the tanks, continued up Ambush Alley onto the northern bridge.
It was complete and utter relief. There was 2 tanks that came over first, and I was able to jump on the tank and say, I need you to put a tank round in this house, and this house, which is exactly where they were firing from the rooftops.
You're up there for a couple hours wondering what's going to happen and why doesn't anyone know where we are, and then you keep hoping that the tanks are going to come over the bridge. reinforce your position. And when they finally do, it was something I'm not going to forget.
And almost as soon as those tanks pushed over the bridge, it was silent. The mortar fire that we're taking, the heavy machine gun fire, the RPGs, it all stopped.
That was one of the best things I've seen the whole day. It's just great to see them. It was just a little more security, a little more firepower for us.
As evening fell, the battalion moved north of Nasiriyah to reorganize and care for the wounded.
You could tell they'd fought hard. I got up to Dan Whitnam. He had blood all over him. A lot of the Marines had blood all over them from other Marines. You know, they were cut, they were beat up. It was just hard looking at them.
It was hell on earth. We were taking a beating down there. Something was going on that we just couldn't handle. That day, I was scared. And I was also fearful that it was going to happen every day for the next couple of days, at least weeks, months, years, and that it was going to happen pretty much all over Iraq.
There was a Humvee load full of just parts, just unidentified body parts. We had to preserve the body parts so that we could get the DNA from them and find out who they were. And there were guards placed on there to keep birds and dogs from eating them.
The Americans had come up against opponents that were not in the battle plan. Large numbers of determined Fedayeen troops and Ba'ath Party militia who were loyal to Saddam and prepared to fight to the death. It's the resistance they are still fighting today.
I think we underestimated their willingness to fight on the part of the Fedayeen. There are questions we had at the battalion and company level that we never had answered. There's a lot of things I would have liked to know more about. You know, the result was we ended up doing things the way we did them. You know, hindsight being 20/20, there's things we certainly would have done differently.
The Marines took and kept those bridges that day, but at a terrible cost. 18 Marines from Charlie Company died, the biggest single U.S. loss during the war. Kevlar helmets and body armor saved many others, but couldn't prevent horrific injuries.
My left leg's fine. I had one piece of shrapnel they thought was in my ankle joint, which they kind of somehow moved without doing surgery. I don't know how they did it. But as far as my right side, nerve damage, you know, I got screws in that run through my femur into my pelvis. My left backside, it's completely gone. You know, I walk with a limp. Doctor said it'll probably be a permanent limp, more than likely probably for the rest of my life. Their comment was that they could get me back to living a normal life, but they can't get me back to staying, you know, with the rigors that the Marine Corps demands, which, you know, I'm still trying to prove them wrong from that.
There isn't a day that has passed since, or will it for the rest of my life, that I don't think about the potential that those Marines had, and regret that I feel and the company feels, I think as a whole, that we weren't able to bring everyone back.
Their mission was to capture those bridges. They knew that's what they had to accomplish, and at the end of the day, not only had they rescued 10 American soldiers that had been ambushed earlier in the day, but they had captured both bridges, and they had opened the door to Baghdad through Nasiriyah.
In the desert, the soldiers of the Army's 3rd Infantry Division moved from the southwest steadily towards Baghdad.
In reality, we stayed pretty close to our plan. Start to finish, we didn't have a timetable on it. Not every movement went perfectly, and we had to adjust based on the situation.
One of the Army units on the move through the desert was 270 Armor. On March 25th, 5 days into the war, it was ambushed by the worst desert weather for a generation.
I looked off to the right,
and I saw this enormous wall coming at us, an orange wall.
I looked over at my loader, made a real loud gasping noise. His eyes got real big, and I believe his words were, "Holy shit." I looked back in the direction behind me that he was looking at, and I saw a wall of sand, a wall of red sand moving across the desert. It must have been several hundred feet high.
And the guys in the vehicle were like, "Oh, look at that, that's cool." I go, "Roll up the windows right now." And about a minute later, that wall just slammed into us.
I turned back to slam my hatch, and I was nearly blown out of the turret by the force of the wind and the sand as it hit me. It's nothing like anything I'd ever experienced. It was the most eerie feeling that I think I've ever had.
After 48 hours, the sandstorm lifted and the army continued their push north. To reach Baghdad, they had to pass through the Karbala Gap, a 10-kilometer bottleneck of open ground between a lake and the built-up area on the southwestern approach to the Iraqi capital.
As we put together our plan, I realized that was a choke point that we would have to move through. And so it was a key piece of terrain that enabling the division to get up towards Baghdad, we would have to seize and control. And the fact that it narrowed down to basically two roads going through the gap, we would be very targetable there.
The area south of Baghdad, including the gap, was guarded by several divisions of Republican Guard. Blunt first sent in waves of attack aircraft, jets, and helicopters to inflict as much damage as possible. Then, to draw Iraqi reinforcements away from the Karbala Gap, he planned a feint, a diversion or bogus advance towards Al-Hillah.
We intended to try to keep him guessing as to where we were going to come towards Baghdad from. Was it going to be in the south or were we going to stay to the west? And so we continually made crossings across the Euphrates to partly demonstrate that we had that capability that we might still come from the south. Another purpose was to try to identify his artillery, try to make it move or shoot, and then we could action against that.
270 Armor was tasked with carrying out the feint. On the way, they saw the result of overwhelming coalition air power.
When we were driving around Kifl, that's where we saw the most dead bodies and carnage. We saw a lot of trucks, a lot of vehicles that were on a road or highway that had been destroyed on that road from the air, and we saw lots of death. So lots of children, lots of adults, lots of body parts. It was starting to sink in. I know that was the first time for a lot of people that they had seen what military power can do to a human being in the flesh.
Reinforced by light infantry from the 101st Airborne Division, 270 Armor prepared for what was expected to be a sideshow.
The initial briefing I had received was that we were going to be a feint from the south up into Al-Hillah, and that we would expect, minimal to no contact. And the direct words I was told was, it's going to be a walk in the park.
Most of us were a little upset that, we were brought all the way out here to be in a fake battle. And we really wanted to go up to Karbala because that's where we thought the action was going to be.
It was described to me as a walk in the park. We would move up towards Hilla and we'd be back in a few hours. There were supposedly a few Fedayeen in the area, and we weren't really expecting a whole lot at this battle.
At first light on the 31st of March, tanks of 270 Armor set off in staggered columns towards Al-Hillah. The light infantry from the 101st Airborne Division rode exposed on the back of the tanks. Bringing up the rear were the scout and mortar platoons. Flying ahead of the convoy, looking for Iraqi positions, were heavily armed Apache attack helicopters. But just as they reached the city's outskirts, they came under intense anti-aircraft fire.
The sky just erupted, black poofs everywhere, and I just immediately flashed to Sunday afternoons watching World War II movies and the old bomber guys flying in, and I'm hit, Blackie, I'm hit, and the whole 9 yards.
I looked out my left window, and I saw a Fedayeen guy standing in a courtyard of a building, and he had a smoking RPG round, or launcher, and at that point we got hit with the RPG, and our wingman came over the radio, RPG, RPG.
It shredded through the belly of the aircraft and knocked out my radar altimeter. So we egressed that area at best possible speed, because being inside of a cloud of black smoke with flying hot metal is not exactly where you want to be.
As soon as the Apaches were hit, the armored column came under fire. The tanks had effectively been ambushed by a large Iraqi force.
I started noticing guys running around with AKs and RPGs on their back. And at first, you know, I was in disbelief. I was like, this can't be happening. So then it just started. We started engaging RPG teams, which were approximately anywhere from 10 to 15 feet directly off to our right and left. The battle just began right then.
The tank crews were sitting inside thick armor, but the infantry were exposed on the outside of it.
I heard 3 or 4 rounds hit next to my foot. We just started laughing, because the initial was just really shock. Like, I can't believe we're actually getting shot at. And then suddenly it just snapped, like, wait a minute, this isn't funny. If we don't, that was really close.
The Scout and mortar platoons at the rear were the first to receive rocket-propelled grenade, or RPG, hits and effective Iraqi artillery fire.
I saw the first volley come in. It was an RPG round. It hit right on the side of the scout vehicle, and a huge, enormous dust plume emanated from it. I immediately thought that we'd lost the scout vehicle.
I ain't gonna lie, I was scared. I mean, I was freaked out, you know? A lot of us were the first time at war, and all the things I knew of war was what I seen in Hollywood movies, you know? I tried to stay calm, you know?
270 armor seemed outnumbered and outgunned by what turned out to be a trained Republican Guard division.
Our thoughts of the enemy's competence was rising. Here we were, 270. We were loaded for bear and ready to go kick some ass. And now they got artillery, and they're shooting at our helicopters, and they're shooting at our soldiers, and it all started to sink in.
It was clear to me that we were up against something entirely different than what we had come across previously. It was very clear that this was a professional and determined foe, and then we had a long day ahead of us.
I honestly thought we probably ran up against a battalion, because I was thinking to myself, oh boy, I think we screwed up here. There's a lot of guys out here. One tank on the right side of the road's firing, and all of a sudden, tanks on the left side starts picking up fire. You're like, oh man, there's a lot of people out here.
The walk in the park was turning into a fully fledged battle. The first American casualty was one of the troops exposed on the back of the tanks. Specialist Brandon Rowe of the 101st Airborne was shot from a machine gun nest in a water tower.
I looked over at him and seen him grab me for his chest. And I yelled to the medic, hey, man down, man down.
We took him off the tank, and his body just became limp. The guy really just never had a chance. It was then that I just, with perfect clarity, just realized the magnitude of what had just happened and the seriousness of what we were doing.
He was a good kid. You know, usually I have a lot of answers for these guys. And it's my job to be hard on them, to train them aggressively, make sure that they're prepared for anything that's thrown at them. They sucked that day because this kid, the last thing he said to me is, "I'm shot." I had no answer for him.
I got eyes on the machine gun nest in the tower that was firing down on one of our other tanks. So I dropped down and notified the crew about the tower and loaded an impact round and armed the main gun. But afterwards I popped back up and it was cooked. It was toast. I mean, there was hardly anything left of that tower.
Isolated in the belly of the tank, the driver, Jason Ramos, had a ringside seat of the battle.
It was like playing PlayStation. I'm sitting in the front. I get to see everything that's in front of me. While the gunner is just in the hole, all he sees is this little circle thing.
Even though we were kind of separate in the tank, and we all worked together.
He'll scan right, he'll scan left, you just take him down. The turrets just moving left and right. You're always constantly moving.
At times, the fighting was at close quarters.
I was still up in the turret when I noticed an RPG team consisting of about 5 to 6 guys. I grabbed my sidearm, my M9 9mm pistol, and I fired all 3 of my magazines, 45 rounds. I vividly remember seeing one of the soldiers actually go down, and he was shooting an RPG as I shot him.
I only fired my pistol 3 times. I saw an RPG team. Shot one guy, it looked like his ear flew off. So I went for a body shot and he went down. And the other guy went for a body shot and he went down.
At the rear, a civilian vehicle was attacking the column.
The mortars that were on the highway were coming under fire from a white pickup truck, and I could see that it was loaded with a lot of people. And I could hear ricochets and I could hear bullets, and that's when I gave the command to open fire on the truck.
I saw 3 people pile out of the back, and they went into a ditch or the canal or whatever.
What I seen next was pretty disturbing because what came out of the ditch was like 2 men and I'd say about 5 to 6 females.
I remember this one woman, she was holding a baby in her arms, and she was showing me the baby, and the baby wasn't moving. And I thought, oh my God, we shot this baby.
And I remember my heart, dropped, hit my feet, and I thought, boy, I hope we didn't kill this baby. And it started moving around, and I kind of breathed a sigh of relief there.
So I was mad, and I was upset that first time I had to shoot during the war was towards a truck full of human shields. And it was women, and it was babies, and it was old men.
That's the time that home feels the furthest away. It feels like home's so far away that you probably never gonna see it again.
Heavy firepower slowly wore down the determined, but poorly trained and ill-coordinated Iraqis. Desperately charging the tanks, they were mown down in their hundreds.
It was probably about 8 hours and pretty much lasted all day. It was only towards sunset that it subsided substantially, and we were only dealing with limited resistance at that point, onesies and twosies.
My gunner says, "Hey, sir, I think I got a single troop running down the road. Range is about 1,200 meters. So I quickly jumped down, looked through my sight. I said, "Whit?" I said, "I think that's a dog, but I'm not sure." He goes, "Yeah, I can't tell either. I think it's a troop. I think that's a weapon in his hands." And I said, okay. I said, go ahead, take the shot. 1,200 meters is fairly far for a machine gun. He let out a short burst, and shortly after, a few seconds after the burst, you saw a dog go head over heels, did about 3 somersaults. And it's something that that bothered me, and I think it bothered him for a couple days.
The armor and infantry had neutralized the opposition, but they had to come to terms with the loss of one of their men.
I think that's when it hit us, you know. Sitting there with a platoon of guys crying. I mean, just uncontrolled. I mean, just, that probably hurt. That hurt the most, just sitting there crying, knowing that we did everything that we could. We were prepared for it. We were ready for it. You know, it was just that one glitch.
As they withdrew towards the south, the road behind them was littered with their day's work.
It was at this point that we saw the full weight of what had happened, and it was just utter devastation. Hundreds of bodies all over the road in various forms of death. Burnt, blown apart, bullet holes. I just remember the enormous stench of death. Something that I'll never forget.
By the 1st of April, the combat teams of the Army's 3rd Infantry Division were heading towards Baghdad from 2 different directions. The maneuver east of the Euphrates at Al-Hilal had worked. The Iraqi army south of Baghdad appeared not to know where to concentrate its forces.
Because we're coming on 2 different prongs, one east of the river with at Hilla, and us going through the Karbala Gap west of the river, he couldn't figure out where to commit his armor, because as soon as he pulls them out from under the palm groves, they're going to get killed by the combined air forces and precision rockets and other things.
With the Karbala Gap wide open, the Army could speed most of its heavy armor through the gap and on towards the last obstacle on the march to Baghdad, the river crossing at the Euphrates.
We now owned a significant piece of terrain, that gap, and the ability to press the rest of the coalition force through west of the Euphrates and strike directly at his weakness, which ultimately leads into the heart of the regime itself, which is exactly what the whole point of maneuver warfare is. Move quickly when you can, accept decisive battle when you need to, but most importantly, strike the enemy where he is completely unprepared and doesn't have the ability to quickly adjust to the plan. And that's the whole point.
On the morning of the 2nd of April, the 3rd Infantry Division fought their way to the banks of the Euphrates River. By the evening, they had captured the bridges at Karbala and Hindia, and under fire, crossed to the other side.
For me, getting across the Euphrates, that was really the last place where we would be concentrating our forces to cross this one bridge that we needed to seize. And so when we were able to get our first tanks across, that really was, to me, a decisive point that I knew we could get to Baghdad then, and there wouldn't be anything he could do to stop us.
So it's about 20 hours from when we start this fight. We own the Euphrates River now, and we're across, and we're knocking on the door of Baghdad.
In just 2 weeks, the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps had traveled 500 miles from Kuwait through southern Iraq towards Baghdad. Now they were poised south of the Iraqi capital for the final assault. But to end Saddam's regime, they would have to break into his stronghold. They would have to fight their way into Baghdad.
From the enemy's perspective, there's no way that he had the command and control apparatus, the skill, or quite frankly, the force at hand to react to what we were doing. I mean, he's threatened all the way in the east by the Marines. He's threatened by us on east of Karbala by 3rd Brigade, on the river, across the river, and down into south of Baghdad and onto the airport. That's way too many fights.
Still dead, then this
The U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division led the attack. Its commander, Major General Buford Blunt, decided to strike at the heart of Saddam's regime by seizing 2 vital areas.
Key pieces of the city that I'd identified and the Corps had identified for the division was the airport. As much political statement as anything else. The other piece that we'd identified was the downtown palace area, the government seat, that, where Saddam's home, the government operated at. Those were the 2 key pieces of the city that I thought we needed to control.
In Baghdad, a mixture of Special Republican Guard and determined but ill-trained militia prepared to defend the city. At the airport, Iraqi defenders dug in for an attack from the air, not suspecting that soldiers from the 1st Brigade combat team were rapidly closing in on them along the airport road.
It's about 8 o'clock at night. It's dark, 0 illumination, so there's no moon, no nothing. And all the lights in Baghdad are out that night. They're expecting vertical envelopment. Most everybody's gone to ground underneath, and that's where they live, is underground.
At this point, it's almost pitch black as we begin the assault. My lead elements actually parallel the wall for a little bit as we were looking for a point of entry. We had expected, upon our crashing through onto the airport, obviously a greeting from the Iraqis in the form of obviously fire coming at us, some type of defense. It was very eerie because once we got onto the airfield itself, everything was quiet. There was actually no fire on us, so it was sort of almost a false sense of security being on the base of the airfield. We really didn't have any contact until about, I would say, 4 o'clock, 4:30, once the sun started coming up and the Iraqis realized that we were right, literally on top of them, and that's when all hell broke loose.
First light, that place came alive with fighters who came up out of the ground for morning prayer, and all of a sudden it's, holy cow, where'd all these Americans come from? So thousands of firefights erupt all over that place.
We start seeing all kinds of hot spots. A lot of RPGs going off, a lot of small arms fired, a lot of enemy trying to run and hide, just basically people popping up everywhere. They didn't know we were there until we were right on top of them. When the daylight, the sun started rising, it pretty much calmed down. At first, we were seeing 10 to 15 enemy troops at one time. Then it started slimming down. You might see 5, then 3. Then after a while, it just got quiet. Nobody was around anymore.
Soldiers of 1st Brigade then got their first glimpse of the heart of Saddam's regime, a palace near the airport, abandoned minutes before.
My company was given the task to go clear a couple of buildings in the palaces and include the one palace, the actual palace itself, which was incredibly ornate, incredibly ostentatious. It was actually a marvel at probably how to misspend one's funds within the country. It was actually appalling to a degree. I mean, it was both beautiful and disgusting at the same time.
And all of a sudden, we're in this palace-like thing: marble, glass, crystal, silver, beautiful Persian carpets. It's everything we had read about. And all of a sudden we're there, and it's just absolutely unbelievable.
Red phone, yep.
Captured a Syrian guy in a refrigerator in one of the palace kitchens. He said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here to defend the faith." A colonel, subsequently we know, a Special Republican Guards colonel, brought us out here, gave us weapons, told us to fight. The Americans are coming, and to defend and die for the faith. And then he left.
Over the next 24 hours, Iraqis counterattacked. Attacks which were ferocious but ineffective, sometimes with improvised weapons.
I mean, people on a 250cc motorcycle with a recoilless rifle mounted on a sidecar, shooting at an M1 tank. Well, it's never going to win. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. 50 guys with AKs right in the back of a cargo truck, taking on a fighting vehicle, that can shoot and kill them at 2 kilometers direct fire. They're never going to win, but they do it over and over and over again.
The airport was now in the hands of U.S. forces, but the regime was still maintaining that the Americans were being defeated.
We crushed the forces in Saddam International Airport, and we cleaned the whole place of the airport. Now the Republican Guard is in full control of Saddam International Airport.
Okay, good job. All right.
I felt a huge sense of accomplishment on behalf of the brigade combat team, certainly, but I think the division, because that's the first regime icon to fall. Now, obviously, I'm not sleeping really easily yet, but we're where we were supposed to be, and we knew the regime's on its heels.
The Marines, meanwhile, had taken the southeastern route to Baghdad to confuse Iraqi forces about the direction of the main attack. They'd met resistance the whole way, more like ambushes than the coordinated engagements they had planned for.
We expected a modern battlefield. We expected thousands of artillery pieces, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of soldiers. We expect to take casualties. The platoons and the companies were having platoon and company size engagements, just like it has always been.
You got a sniper in the tower behind you!
And it was inch by inch, it was foot by foot, it was just like World War II stuff. They were jumping into fighting positions and putting bayonets in folks. And that's as high intensity as it gets for any soldier or any Marine.
They were ready to attack Baghdad from the east. But to get there, they would have to cross the Diyala River, a narrow waterway so insignificant that it had not even been mentioned in briefings.
If you look in Iraq, the thing that sticks out is the Mesopotamian plain and the boundaries of that, which are the Euphrates, which is a big honking river, and the Tigris, which is a big honking river. Those stick out to everybody who looks at a map. And then we got to the Diyala, and this little doggone, creek reinforced, had no crossing sites. And so here we were, had crossed all these major obstacles, and we're kind of slowed down and faced with a situation that we quite frankly didn't want.
And the helicopter reconnaissance reports told us that the bridges were blown. As we moved up towards our bridge, we noticed a large flow of not so much refugees, but I would say looters, and they were hauling refrigerators. I saw a John Deere tractor or two, forklifts. They were all heading south, and I said, boy, if they're moving south, they must have crossed the bridge somehow. As we moved up onto the bridge, it was in fact blown. It had a large crater put in the middle of one of the spans, and it was unpassable to any of our large vehicles.
The Marines halted, waiting to cross the river and join the fight in Baghdad. It was the moment that the engineers had trained for. They brought forward equipment of Vietnam vintage to try and bridge the gap.
We're coming up to the river, and I had to go to a small briefing from this lieutenant. And what he told me was, basically, we're gonna use our vehicle and lay down an additional support of a bridge on top of one. Our job is just basically just get up there, lay it down in a swift, safe, orderly manner, and inspect it just to make sure when these 70-ton tanks go over that the bridge isn't gonna collapse. That's our job.
The young sergeant operating it, I don't even know if he knew how critical what he was doing. He got out and inspected his work. I remember even without his helmet. I remember us all yelling at him, put your helmet on for God's sake.
And meanwhile, people shooting all over the place, but I thought it was us shooting at them. In turn, I found out it was them shooting at us.
My vehicle was the first vehicle to go over there. It was pretty rough. It was scary because your tracks are so far apart, and you don't know if your vehicle's gonna make it over that big bridge, and you don't know where to go or which way to turn. But you know what? Just drive forward and go over and hope you just don't fall. I remember seeing a big rocket. I don't know what it was, but it was pretty big, and I was like, thank God that thing didn't get fired at us. That's one thing I remember.
So that northern bridge turned out to be a gold mine for us in terms of giving us the ability and the flexibility to maneuver on Baghdad.
So now we took part in something a little bit bigger than the average man, you know, and even though we thought it was nothing, someone up there, the higher ups, you know, those who control things, they see that we did something great. So, I mean, for me, it felt really good.
With Baghdad airport taken, U.S. Army tanks massed to the south. For months, planners had argued about how to take Baghdad. Accepted military doctrine stated it would take infantry with tanks in support. Major General Blunt's plan challenged that. He wanted tanks alone to storm through Baghdad from the south to meet friendly forces at the airport. It was a lightning maneuver to test Baghdad's defenses. It became known as the Thunder Run.
Then we wanted to really find out what he was going to do in the city, how he was going to defend the city. We hadn't actually gone into the city yet. We had the outside secured. We knew there was still about a tank battalion's worth of tanks that the Special Republican Guards had that we had not destroyed yet. We didn't know where those were. And we knew he was going to defend the city in some detail, but we didn't know how hard he was going to fight.
The plan of urban warfare with tanks took the soldiers of 164 Armor, part of 3rd Infantry Division, by surprise.
On April 4th, the night we got the order, our company commander called all the platoon leaders and platoon sergeants in for a little huddle around his Humvee. And he explained that we're gonna go and we're gonna do the thing that none of us thought we were gonna do. We're gonna take tanks through the center of Baghdad. And we all kind of looked at each other. The one mission we thought we'd never see, we were gonna do.
When we first got the word, we were a little scared. We were anxious, we were excited because that's what we came to do.
And then we asked the brigade intelligence officer, what's the enemy situation we can expect? And he honestly had no idea.
We started cleaning our machine guns, linking up ammo, doing before operations checks, make sure everything was ready to go.
The real intent was to show the enemy we're here and we can do this. We can get through the city. We're not afraid to fight you in the cities because the Iraqi were convinced, and that was their propaganda party line, that we wouldn't fight them in the cities, that we couldn't win in the cities.
On the 5th of April, the tanks of 164 Armor set off from the southern edge of Baghdad for the first Thunder Run into the city.
We just rolled onto this 8-lane highway with these tanks. And the traffic was still going. It was like the middle of the day, so the traffic was normal. And you saw cars swerving around the tanks and everything like that. Looking back on it, it was really a sight.
It was such a sight that one soldier took some photos of the assault into Baghdad from the turret of his tank.
I remember coming over the radio saying to my wingman, how are we going to get through this traffic? And all I heard was this 10-year veteran from the Army saying, don't worry, I got it. He just gave us some gas and went straight on into the traffic.
Meanwhile in Baghdad, Republican guards, irregular Iraqi troops, and foreign fighters, surprised by the approaching convoy, scrambled to defend the city at overpasses and road junctions with shoulder-launched RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades.
The Iraqis had positions all the way on that road. RPGs, anti-aircraft guns, artillery pieces, some BMPs, even some tanks. We countered contact the entire route. It was literally a gauntlet.
This truck came to our right side, and it was two guys in the truck, a little white, like maybe Toyota or something, and it started engaging my tank commander with a pistol. And in return, my tank commander encountered with a little fire from his M4 carbine, and he killed the driver, and the passenger tried to grab the wheel. And as they came up past us, my tank commander said, engage them. And so we turned the turret around, and we let him have with all the machine guns that we had, and just demolished the truck. Watching that technical go up like that, it was just a sign of our power.
thing that's hard about urban is they have a lot of places to hide. And their tactics was wait till we passed by and then to engage us. It was pretty much a lesson on the go.
The Thunder Run was going as planned when intense, well-aimed fire threatened to disrupt the whole maneuver.
As we cleared the first overpass, the elite elements fought their way through there. It was a pretty tough fight, but we kept moving. The trail tank company had one of their tanks hit. The RPG penetrated into the engine compartment and started a fire. We had to stop. We didn't want to abandon the vehicle unless we had to. We spent probably 30 minutes because every time we thought the fire was out, the vehicle would catch fire again. And as we were there, the company was constantly being attacked.
The lead tank crews continued with their assault, not realizing that the rear of the column had stopped behind a stricken tank. At the command post, General Blunt watched the drama unfold on a satellite tracking system.
I could see that there was a break in the column. I was talking to the brigade commander, and he had reported they had a tank that had caught fire, and that was what was causing the break. I was really concerned about the separation in the column where they had that, about a 2-kilometer gap there that had developed as that one tank went down.
You could see Saddam's forces, the Special Republican Guard, as well as the Fedayeen crawling up the back streets ahead of us.
These fights were 100 meters, 50 meters, I know in some cases 10 feet. We began to describe the enemy as determined yet stupid. These guys would literally come right at you. It was a bit unnerving. It's not something we expected, and we didn't expect that kind of fanaticism from the Ba'ath Party.
As the Thunder Run headed to the safety of the airport, one of the tank commanders was fatally wounded.
As we got close to the airport, the resistance got stiffer, and that's because the Iraqis had expected the main attack to come from the airport. And here we came in behind them.
I think the magic moment for us is when we saw the friendly forces at the Baghdad airport. Once we got onto that solid ground, that was definitely a momentous moment, so to speak.
Major Donovan took photos of the scene on the airport's runway in the aftermath of the battle.
Well, it was a very emotional time for me. It was the decision to do the movement was mine. They pulled into the airport there, and I met them, and they'd been a pretty tough fight. Every vehicle had been hit by some type of fire, small arms or RPGs or artillery. We'd lost one of our tank commanders in that fight. Had 2 or 3 other soldiers wounded badly, and so we got them out medically. But I went around and talked to all the soldiers, and that was important for me to see the impact that it had and what shape they were in.
That was the first time we really lost any of our soldiers, so it's kind of an eerie feeling amongst us, very solemn atmosphere.
I looked around, and all these 18-year-old kids that we just took on a ride for their life, of their life, had a 1,000-mile stare, so to speak. The battalion commander had come up to me and he said, how you doing? And I said, sir, I'm doing about as well as can be expected. And he goes, well, good, because we're probably going to go back in tomorrow. And at that point in time, I think my stomach went into knots. It was gut-wrenching, thinking that we would have to go through there again.
24 hours later, 164 Armor skirted around Baghdad and went back into the city along the same route as the first Thunder Run. But this time, they wouldn't turn west towards the airport. They would head into the heart of Baghdad and stay there.
If you can hit them fast and furious, and what we call stirring up the hornet's nest, once you could swat all those hornets down, they usually broke their back of resistance. And then after that, you just deal with limited attacks. We just charged in there into downtown Baghdad, got set, got in position, and they were never strong enough to push us out.
Where are we going?
My platoon was the first platoon to go through Saddam Hussein's VIP viewing stands. That's the famous Sabre Arch that you see in Baghdad on all pictures. It's a little weird crossing it because that's where Saddam stood watching his armor formations, and there we are, minus Saddam, of course. We wish he was there, but obviously he wasn't.
You could tell that's where he'd stand up there and watch his army go by or whatever. It's a pretty nice feeling. It's kind of like being on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., you know, all the monuments. That's what it felt like.
Well, one thing I do remember was going down to the parade field in downtown Baghdad after we seized that. You know, the big where the cross sabers are, and going under the sabers, where the and going up to where Saddam had stood and watched all the parades go by. That was very meaningful to me.
We had a couple of cigars saved up for just the occasion, and we went ahead and smoked those that night.
During that day, tanks rolled into the heart of Baghdad and onto the bridges crossing the Tigris. The Iraqi regime refused to acknowledge that Saddam's hold on the city was now collapsing.
They pushed a few of their armored carriers and some tanks with their soldiers. We besieged them and we killed most of them, and I think we will finish them soon. We will slaughter them all. Those invaders, their tombs will be here in Iraq.
Tanks cleared enemy bunkers along the main routes and the banks of the river. The pictures of fleeing Iraqi soldiers went round the world, hard evidence that U.S. forces were now in Baghdad. But if the army wanted to consolidate their move into the city, they needed to keep a supply route open. Over the next 24 hours, a major battle erupted along Highway 8, the road which headed back to U.S. forces south of the city. The road was the Army's lifeline. If they could keep it open, they would be able to resupply with regular convoys.
The intent behind it was if we could stay one night, we could stay 2 nights. If we could stay 2 nights, we could stay 3.
One of the convoy supply vehicles was hit, and the fire spread to 4 other vehicles. But gradually, the American superior firepower wore down the city's defenders. Many of them turned out to be Syrians who crossed into Iraq to fight the Americans. After 10 hours of intense fighting, 15 vehicles loaded with fuel and ammunition ran the gauntlet and reached the center of Baghdad.
We controlled Baghdad when we were able to do that. I mean, the Marines had not gotten in yet, but we were secured had the west side of the city, that part of it secured. That was our final objective, for the division. So we had reached our objective there.
The Diyala River had held up the Marines, but on the 8th of April, they rolled into Baghdad from the east.
In the case of Baghdad, as of all the built-up areas in Iraq, we didn't really want to go into them because we thought it would be drawn out and nasty and bloody, quite frankly. So going into Baghdad, we were a little hesitant. We were confident in our weapon systems, but what was the enemy going to do? Was he going to take pot shots at us from buildings? Were we going to have to cause a lot of what we would call collateral damage? I'm going to be destroying the homes of innocents, killing the innocent civilians. What is the price we're going to pay to take down Baghdad?
The price would become apparent later, but on that day, the Marines drove straight into Firdaus Square in the city center on the east bank of the Tigris. What happened next became the symbolic end of Saddam's regime.
I had noticed that there was a statue that was in the middle of the square, so I had radioed my executive officer, and I said, sir, I got this statue over here. Can we go knock it down? And he goes, no, Gunny, that's not what we're here for. And I said, roger that, sir. So we sat there for a little bit, and then the next thing you know, the square started filling up with a lot of Iraqi civilians. And one of the Iraqi civilians had walked up to myself at the Mike 88, and he asked me if we could help him take down the statue. And when I relayed what my company commander had said, that that was not what we was here for, he asked for equipment to do it himself. So I gave him a long piece of rope and a sledgehammer, and gave him what I could provide so they could do it themselves. So we sat there and watched them struggle with it for a while before my company commander, Captain Lewis, came up to the 88. He says, Gunny, I want you to prepare to help them take down this statue on my order. I said, Roger that, sir.
As we were moving the 88 up to pull the statue down, I had a young Iraqi civilian male kept asking me over and over and over again for an American flag. This teenager, as teenagers oftentimes are, is persistent. And after I sent him to about 3 or 4 people trying to find an American flag, he came back with Lieutenant McLaughlin's American flag. And he said, okay, basically in broken English, I've got the American flag, and he pointed up on the statue. And finally I was like, okay, give me the flag. I gave it to Sergeant Sutherland. I said, run this thing up top and then pull it back down, and we'll put in an Iraqi flag. We'll go right up after.
We had Corporal Chin, who was from New York, go ahead and place the flag up on top. Not as a sort of saying that we were here to, that we conquered anything, but this is what you're gonna get if you mess with the United States and you support terroristic acts. We was here to take down Saddam and his regime.
The media version was that a U.S. commander ordered the flag to come down. Nevertheless, the Iraqi flag went up soon afterwards.
And they were very insistent about which Iraqi flag went back up.
Because
apparently Saddam had made a change to the Iraqi flag, and he had added some words to it. And the flag that they wanted to see on top of the statue was the old Iraqi national flag that did not have the writing on it. There was an Iraqi civilian with a British accent, and he had one of his shoes in his hand. He's standing right in front of the 88, and the guy is 6'3" or 6'4", thin Iraqi civilian with a British accent, starts hopping up and down and screaming, "I bloody will not, expletive, calm down," and he's hitting the statue with one hand. So we're really dealing with some raging emotions from a lot of the civilians that were there. He wanted that statue to come down. He broke into tears shortly after that, talking about what the regime had done to him and his family. And that was a symbol of the regime, and they wanted it to go away.
Some of the Iraqi citizens which were beating it with the soles of their shoes, which is one of the biggest disgraces, I guess, that they can bestow upon a person. They actually cut off his head and drug it around the street with a chain.
That whole day was very strange. It was totally different than anything that we'd experienced during the war up to that point. But I think there was a nagging feeling in the back of all of my minds that there was plenty left to do.
The army coming from the west and the Marines from the east now had central Baghdad under their control.
We've already talked about just that MPF.
Colonel Joseph Dunford, commanding Regimental Combat Team 5, told his men that the fight for Baghdad wasn't over.
And if you want to talk about enemy, someone's going to have to argue with me pretty hard that anybody since Vietnam fighting the North Vietnamese has confronted an enemy that was this determined.
Now, Colonel Dunford was put in charge of an operation aimed at finishing off the regime for good. Saddam's statue had come down, but somewhere in North Baghdad, the man himself was still at large.
I think about 24 hours, maybe less, prior to us being assigned to go into that particular portion of Baghdad, we got the word there'd been a Saddam Hussein sighting, as well as some of his senior officials.
North Baghdad was still pretty much intact, and nobody had really attacked into it. And this was into a part of the city which was a stronghold, one of his palaces, into a place that no one else had gone.
We knew something was up because we had special forces with us, and that's the first time we had them with us the whole trip. So Eventually, you know, word got passed down a little bit, trickled down to us that we were going to take a palace in Baghdad, and that's all we knew.
Early in the morning on April 10th, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie companies of 1-5 Marines left their base in the north and headed south down Route 2, intending to turn west towards the last remaining Saddam stronghold, the Azamaya Palace. The hunt for Saddam was on.
Just as we came into Baghdad and we were taking a few rounds, there was a small pickup truck or car just off of the side of the road. And as soon as we got level with that, an RPG hit it or something happened to it and it exploded. Kind of lifted the track that we were traveling in up on its side, and then the thing weighs 26 tons, so it was a pretty hefty explosion. It knocked me down into the bottom of the track, knocked my driver's helmet off, and you just saw this big, huge orange fireball.
All of a sudden we're moving, and then the next thing you know that we're stopped. And then all hell broke loose.
All of a sudden, RPG and heavy machine gun and medium machine gun fire erupted all around us.
And we're just pretty much getting shot on from everywhere, from all directions, especially up top.
Muzzle flashes, every building, every little bunker, RPGs hitting tracks left and right.
There was just RPGs, bullets. You can hear the bullets whizzing right by your head, the RPGs flying right by your head, literally.
All I remember hearing is RPGs hitting the wall. The big booms, and you know those were just aimed at you or people outside there. That's when it kind of hit that, man, this is pretty serious.
Not a single track in that convoy didn't get shot at with an RPG.
It was the biggest drive-by you could ever imagine, and it was just the most amazing light show I've ever seen in my life.
On the way to the palace, the convoy took a wrong turn and drove back into the ambush.
The maps we had didn't have the accuracy we needed, so as we were supposed to take the right turn, there was actually 3 right turns, a real sharp right turn, a narrow, and then just a kind of a yield over to the right. And the platoon commander did the best he could, and I ended up turning the wrong route, which caused a lot of confusion.
And we had to turn the whole entire battalion around and go through the ambush again.
You start seeing the same buildings over and over, like we was going around in a big circle. And you're trying to think to yourself, well, what's going on? We're going to the palace, or we're just driving around in a circle right now?
Bravo Company managed to break away from the convoy and found its own way to the palace.
We fired a couple of Mark 19 rounds at the gates. The gates were probably 10 feet high, and they were, heavy iron gates. Didn't do anything to the gates. And I had some engineers attached with me, and they offered to go, set up some demolitions and blow the gates off. But it was going to take about 20 minutes to do, and I knew we didn't have 20 minutes. YXO jumped out of his track and was talking to the engineers and saw that there was an open, like a pedestrian gate off to one of the sides. He just went in there and saw that nobody was in the palace and came around and opened the gates for us. So that's how we ended up getting in there. Not necessarily the textbook example had a breach, but it worked for us.
Marines from Bravo Company established a command base at the palace. They deployed sniper teams on the roof to watch for potential threats.
And you've seen more and more civilian vehicles driving by, cars coming up. There was one specific time the shooter kept asking me as a spotter, hey, does that guy got anything? Does that guy got anything? Give me a reason. It just looked suspicious. There was a lot of car bombs going on and actually suicide bombers just walking up, and the next thing you know, boom, the guy's a red mist.
As Charlie and Alpha arrived to join Bravo inside the palace, they got an urgent change of objective. The search for Saddam was heating up. He'd been sighted again at a nearby mosque.
As the day went on, the intelligence was coming in that they were in a variety of different locations. And when we actually went in specifically to those locations where we thought Saddam Hussein and some of his senior leadership were.
Charlie was sent to a nearby Ba'ath Party stronghold, Alpha to the neighboring Imam Mosque.
When I was told that Saddam Hussein could potentially be our objective, I took it as any other mission, and I really, my heart rate didn't change at all, that Saddam Hussein could potentially be there. I won't say that I was skeptical, but when I saw Saddam Hussein in front of me, then I would have said, okay, I got Saddam Hussein. But until I saw him, I really wasn't going to get excited about it. We then went down a very narrow alleyway, and we could see the mosque in the distance. Again, we were in a very hairy position, going through an avenue which our tanks could not employ their weapon systems. We were basically knocking over back porches and all kinds of stuff to the housing as we were going through these alleys. As we wrapped around the mosque, we were facing a platoon-sized force, probably around 30 guys or so inside the mosque, and a company-sized force around the mosque, which I would estimate about 100 guys or so were around the mosque. As we approached about a block or so from the mosque, the tank platoon that was attached to the company was ambushed, and Lieutenant Patrick's tank was hit with an RPG and immobilized. And we quickly set up security around him, and we allowed him to switch tanks. So it was pretty ballsy move by him to leave his tank under fire from the enemy and switch out and continue the fight with his tank platoon.
This whole time, we're in the middle of a heavy firefight. Like, they're just shooting at us from everywhere. And I've counted, like, there was at least, like, hundreds of RPGs being shot at us. I said, they probably have more RPGs than they do bullets.
There was a white puff of smoke I saw, and then I saw the rocket coming at my head. Just got bigger, bigger, bigger. And then kind of caught it and went past me and exploded right next to me on the top of the armored vehicle. And felt like somebody hit me across the face with a baseball bat.
I don't know where it came from or how it happened, but I was hit in the head with a RPG. I literally got my bell rung. Couldn't hear anything, didn't really know where I was or what happened. Just 1 minute we're taking fire, I'm returning fire, and the next minute I'm in somebody's lap at the bottom of the track.
And I saw blood just gushing out of my face, and that's when it put me into a pretty deep shock.
They passed over the net that I was dead. Called my friends and everything. Told me that they heard I was dead. It's kind of disconcerting a little bit, but I'm still here, so it's good.
Then I realized I was alive too, which kind of had a weird. I was elated to be alive. On the other hand, I was secretly I was afraid that I might pass away, but it was getting to the point where if it happens, it happens.
Got pretty upset, pretty mad. How dare them fire at me, hit me, put all my gear back on, stood up and continued on with the fight.
I knew that we had casualties from the RPG shots. The tank was obviously immobilized. One of our tracks was immobilized with an RPG shot, and it was just a matter of how many Marines were going to come back alive when it was over.
Charlie, meanwhile, approached the Ba'ath Party stronghold.
My company commander called me over, and he had his radio and he had his GPS out on his map, and he said, we have a 10-digit grid of where Saddam's body is. It was believed that Saddam was in the area and that he was killed by the civilians. He tasked my squad, my platoon, with finding the body. So he had a 10-digit grid, and I'd break out my map and go to look for it, and we were pretty damn excited. I mean, that would be one hell of a story to tell if I was the one that found Saddam's body. So we cleared 3 to 5 city blocks. It's tough to remember. When we were clearing through, most of the people were extremely frightened. One particular house at the end, though, we had found a whole entire family, and it's kind of sad because the whole family came in and they got on their knees, and there was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, and she was on her knees, and I was trying to have them stand up because I knew they were civilians, there was no threat, and I had them all in a corner anyway, and I'd say there was about 12 of them. And they were all on their knees, and I pulled out some Iraqi money, and I was, pointing to Saddam's face and say, "Is he in this area? Have you seen him? Have you heard anything?" And I told him, I said, "He's dead, but we need to find his body." And as soon as I said that, everyone jumped up, and they were all yelling and all happy and screaming, and they were trying to offer us water and food, and they were just so much joy, and they were shaking our hands, and they wanted to dance with us, and we had to keep on moving. Keep on searching through all these buildings.
It was now late morning. Bravo was setting up the battalion's command post in the palace. Charlie was clearing the Ba'ath Party stronghold, and Alpha was involved in an intense firefight at the mosque. Now, over the radio, Bravo could hear the chaos at the mosque. Casualties began to pour in, and the battalion already had its first KIA, killed in action.
Gunnery Sergeant Bohr was the one KIA that we had that day. We knew about him as it happened. And then casualty reporting would come in the following days because Marines who were injured didn't want anybody to know that they were injured for fear of being evacuated out. CH-46s were flying in and out, picking up casualties, dropping off ammunition as they went in and out. It was truly pretty phenomenal across the board.
Alpha had now surrounded the mosque, but there was fierce resistance. Under increasingly heavy fire, the Marines asked for air support.
At this point, we got permission to start using our combined arms and start using our aircraft and our artillery, and we called in A-10s to run strikes against the companies outside of the mosque.
Air Force came by and they dropped the 1,000-pound bomb. When they did that, it felt like the earth was in like in the ocean for a few minutes. That was pretty cool.
There was another A-10 strike. At first you didn't know what was going on. You just seeing this building getting destroyed and you hear something, it sounds like a huge machine gun, and then you look up and there's the A-10. I think everybody was screaming and yelling. It was motivating.
Marines stormed the mosque to eliminate any remaining resistance.
There's a huge courtyard, there's marble floors, and there's just elegant gardens everywhere. And then I look to the far side and there's just a machine gun laying down there.
I can hear explosions from inside, them using explosives to open the doors, gunfire, yelling, screaming.
When we got there, it was just massive chandelier on the roof, these huge doors, and there was a giant stairway going down. Someone else from my team went through and he was searching around, and some carpets on the ground. He stepped on this guy.
Scared the hell out of him. And we're trying to talk to this guy, and all he's saying is, America's great, down with Saddam, America's great, down with Saddam. And he's trying to kiss me on the cheek, and I'm trying to push him away.
We had these little cards that have these Iraqi language on it and how to pronounce it.
I said, tell everybody to come up from downstairs, and he said something in Arabic. Nothing happened. I said, tell them we won't harm them if they come up. And he said it in Arabic, and nothing happened. And so I was getting, my patience was wearing a little thin, so I said, tell them we're going to come down there and kill them all if they don't come up right now. And he said that, and not 10 seconds later, 20 guys came running up from downstairs.
We pretty much rounded them up all together, tied them up with a curtain, ripped it up, and utilized a curtain to tie them all together, and walked them out there one by one, right in the middle of all this. They pretty much gave up in there. They knew they were beat.
From the perspective of the Lance Corporals and on up to the company commander, I think that it was about as intense a fight as you're going to face. I mean, it had all the elements. It had fog, it had friction, it had uncertainty, it had imminent danger to each one of those individuals, and with the complexity of being in an urban environment, and that's what they were confronted with.
There's all these cases of near catastrophic incidents that somehow we avoided. I don't know if it was sheer luck or what it was.
After 8 hours of intense fighting, 5 Marines reunited at the palace. 1 Marine had been killed and over 80 wounded, but hundreds of Iraqis had been killed and captured. Innocent civilians had also been caught in the crossfire. The Marines controlled North Baghdad, but the big prize had evaded them.
The fact that Saddam wasn't there didn't really mean anything to me. I was just doing my job, and if he was there, he was there. I was in no way at a sense of loss of mission accomplishment because he was not there. We still went there and captured critical Ba'ath Party members and got our mission accomplished.
The Marines came away without Saddam, but the strategic significance of the battle was enormous. All of Baghdad was now under coalition control.
I've described that particular day as my worst day of the war and my best day of the war. My worst day because of the intensity of fighting and the numbers of casualties that we took. But my best day, and this is where I think that particular day was of significance, at least to RCT-5, and frankly I think to the entire war, despite the ferocity of the fighting on the way into the city, what I was confronted with about 6 or 7 hours after the fighting stopped when I drove back out north of the city was spontaneously thousands of people coming out to cheer us and to thank us for what we had done. And it was at that particular time, I think, that every Marine that was out there understood that what we had done was liberate a people. I think it also signified a transition for us from regular combat operations into security and stability operations. I mean, it happened almost immediately. And the transition in terms of our relationship with the people and the methods that we would use to accomplish the mission changed on that particular day.
But it wasn't that simple. Coalition troops, like the soldiers of 270 Armor who'd fought their way through Iraq, expected to be home within months of the end of the war. But 1 year on, they were still in Baghdad.
I have one daughter. She'll be 2 years old in February, which means I will have missed the second year of her life. Since I've been gone, she's got teeth. She's learned how to talk, walk, run, crawl.
You missed all this?
Yes, and I'm sure I'll miss much more.
Within months of the fall of Saddam's regime, the number of coalition soldiers killed in security operations exceeded the number of those killed during the initial push for Baghdad. U.S. forces were suddenly required to fulfill a double role.
2 nights ago, there was an attack, a mortar attack on the company mortar.
Everybody's wondering, hey, does that box over here, does that bush over there have a bomb in it with my name on it? It's very troubling for many of the soldiers, myself included.
He asked the sound of the bomb. He asked where, I don't know.
To go from kill everything you see to, hey, keep the peace. You're police officers now. A lot of people don't know how to turn the switch in their heads.
So where are the bombs? No.
They've gone through the war, they've been shot at, they've seen their buddies wounded. It's a challenge because they've never been trained to restrain that violence. It's always been apply more violence.
In just 3 weeks, a lean, mobile force with superior technology and aggressive tactics toppled Saddam Hussein's regime in a campaign which cost the lives of 152 coalition troops and thousands of Iraqis. During those 3 weeks, there were clues as to what would happen once Saddam was gone. Coalition forces faced an unpredictable and determined enemy in a battle with no clear end.